Melissa Magsaysay, and I am part of the Little Market Council. I'm honored today to be participating in Conversations with Changemakers, hosted by the Little Market to celebrate International Women's Day. The Little Market is a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering women. This conversation is part of a series that was created to bring awareness to issues that impact women globally. I'm excited today to be talking to an incredible, marvelous group of barrier-breaking women. Eva Chen is the inaugural director of fashion partnerships at Instagram and was the youngest editor at Lucky magazine. She's also started some of my favorite Instagram moments, which maybe she'll talk about later. MILCK is a singer-songwriter. Her song Quiet became an anthem and call to action for millions of women. And the chorus of Quiet is literally my daily rallying cry. So thank you, MILCK. Yes, absolutely. Amanda Nguyen is a Nobel Peace Prize nominee and founder and director of Rise, a nonprofit that is changing the legal landscape around sexual violence. And I have been so inspired by you always, especially through the past few months with all of your activism on social media. So thank you for that, Amanda, and welcome to all of you. I am personally a fan of all of you, so thank you for all of the incredible work you do. All of your work is amazing. Your activism, your barrier breaking, and of course, how you lead when it comes to Asian identity and representation. So I'd love to address that topic first. Amanda, how does your identity as a young Asian American woman shape your activism?
Thank you so much for including me today. I'm so happy and just really honored to be a part of this group. For your question, how I view myself as an Asian American and part of this diaspora, really, of Asian female experience, I want to say it's really rooted in authenticity, in trying to be just true to oneself. Growing up, I had refugee immigrant parents, right, who were trying to survive in America. And I didn't really know how to balance, my heritage with this brave new world. But I think through all of it, it really comes back to speaking truth, speaking one's own identity into consciousness, and just staying true to who you are.
And you've also said that it's Asian excellence and identity is rooted in joy, which is such a profound thing to say and such an important thing to remember.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, current events right now have shown Asian grief. And it is so critical that people, one, speak up about it and also validate it. Say, hey, I see you, I hear you. On top of that, I think the next question is, well, what's next? And of course, it has to be not only covering Asian grief, but also Asian excellence. This conversation is centered around International Women's History Month. And so as we explore changemakers who identify as female, who are women, it's so important to understand that the threads of justice are, well, different colors. That includes Asian Americans, and it includes other communities of color as well.
Absolutely.
I think one of the things that Amanda hit on that really just struck a chord with me was the concept of parents, at least my parents as well, who are immigrants, being so much rooted in survival and spending their time in a new country, not speaking the language, adjusting to this new culture. And so it was very much about assimilation, keeping your head down and being quiet. And one of the things that I'm seeing that I'm very inspired by the next generation, like Amanda, you and I have been texting for like what feels like months at this point, and this is our first time face to face. I'm so excited, honored. But one of the things that inspires me about the next generation, Amanda included, is this concept of like, it's not just about survival now. Like the AAPI community is speaking up. They are, sharing the diaspora of experience that we have. Everyone has a different experience. All four of us women here have different paths, different journeys, different stories to tell. I know a lot of the conversation is happening on Instagram. There are movements happening on Instagram, and speaking up. I mean, I'm so inspired by that, and I'm inspired by the work that MILCK is doing. I'm inspired by you, Amanda, Melissa. Like, I'm so happy you're moderating this, and how vocal you've been as well. So, I'm very. That really struck a chord with me, Amanda.
I wanted to echo the sentiment about our parents. What you were saying, Eva. I think that's a good point, and Amanda touched on that as well. The unique experience of being children of immigrants is that it's almost like we're straddling the emotional arc of two generations, because I think, like you said, our parents were trying to survive in a new land, and the capacity for their time and energy to emotionally process what was happening to them was limited. I can't speak for everyone. For my specific family, I think I'm processing not only my own emotions of being a woman of color in the United States, but also processing for them what it feels like for them to watch me live the dreams that they couldn't fully live out. And so that's an interesting experience, I think. And I'm curious if you all agree with that type of double processing.
Sure.
Yeah, I couldn't actually agree more. I mean, I think trauma actually does come scientifically, it carries through generations, right? And so as we are learning how to grapple with, yes, the hate crimes that are happening to us as a community right now, and also put that in juxtaposition with their experiences, and also in what kind of world we're trying to build right now, I think all of that is so nuanced, and we are at such a critical inflection point that not only calls on our heritage and our past, but also calls on a shared vision, cross community together with solidarity with other folks to walk into a more equitable country and future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And to your point about our parents, I mean, in my experience, especially in the past month, I sort of peripherally have known my parents' experience through stories, of course, through family gatherings. But, to your point, MILCK, it's sort of we're here, move forward, whatever that takes, that survival mode. And so, talking about recent incidents and the way personally, and I think in a lot of us, it's sort of been a reawakening and this sort of opportunity to reimagine what the future can be. And to your point, Amanda, building a more equitable world, it's opened some new kinds of conversation between me and my parents, and maybe amongst you too, to really dig even deeper into their experience and draw from it and learn from it. So absolutely. And then, speaking of, again, representation, Eva, there's lots of stereotypes, of course, when it comes to Asian women, and you have, are part of breaking those down every day, making space for people to feel seen in an industry that can be very brutal in terms of image and stereotypical and unrealistic standards that are set for women, especially those who don't fit in the dominant culture. Do you think that things are changing for us?
I do think things are changing. I think the change has accelerated, certainly in the last 5 years. I remember when I was growing up, the standards of beauty were very set. This was the generation of the supermodels, right? They all similar body types, all had the same color skin. And I remember thinking, as a very impressionable young teenager, that no one looks like me, people with eyes the shape like mine or hair like mine, it's not considered beautiful. You have to have like big, gorgeous blonde hair and blue eyes, and that is beauty. And I am incredibly inspired right now by conversations around changing standards of beauty, differently abled, different body types, different race, different ethnicity, different identifications. And one of the things that, really kind of every time I see this happen, and this happens every season at Fashion Week, because I work at Instagram, I oversee the fashion vertical, and I see this happening where if there's a fashion show that's happening and it's like one note casting, I call it, where it's like one type of person, you're going to see people speak up about that. You're going to hear like the next generation being like, this does not look like me. Like this show does not, like this brand is not speaking to me. And I think there's this expectation now that a modern brand must be inclusive. A modern brand must be able to embrace many people. When I think of the beauty brand Glossier, for instance, like I think they've done a very good job of that. Like when you think about their casting, they were the first to cast the Instagram kind of voice. Palomijas is her Instagram, but Paloma SLR. Hope I'm pronouncing her last name right. But like, and I remember she's a beautiful curvy woman, and she was shot for their body campaign nude. And she wrote about what a big moment this was for her on Instagram. It's like moments like that where people, it might be a 15-year-old girl who has a similar body type will say, that looks like me. And now like there are many, many more East Asian models. I'd like to see more South Asian models. I think that's an area we can catch up in. And just like the representation is increasing, but I kind of leave it to let the people speak. And I hope that the brands are listening, that you must be more inclusive and have more AAPI faces.
Absolutely. And, this is a whole big part of course, Asian identity conversation is this, the concept that Asians, we are not a monolith. And a lot of that, there's a million ways to explore that and educate and convey that, but visuals, social media, these far-reaching Instagram, these far-reaching platforms, big campaigns like Glossier or any major beauty brand or fashion house, that's a really strong first step to start casting, not just you've got 5 Asian girls, or 5, if you're lucky, I guess maybe 2 or 3 Asian girls in a show or in a campaign, but you have a Filipino woman and you have a Vietnamese woman or just not just Asian, and really exploring visually that visual representation of what Asian means and imparting that on the viewer and on the reader or the viewer, consumer.
I would say that in fashion, I would actually say is a little bit more evolved in terms of embracing the Asian identity than say Hollywood. And I don't know that realm as much. I think MILCK most definitely does, working in entertainment and being a musician. But like, I do feel like in Hollywood, representation of Asians is way behind still. Like there are still TV shows where it is like an Asian character who's the butt of a joke or who has a very strong accent. And it frankly like infuriates me that, or they're portrayed as like, always the doctor, like, or like the kind of type A lawyer type person. And it's not showing Asians as artists, as poets, as writers, which we all are. So I think there's a lot of evolution to be done there. I do think a lot of the next generation of shows, especially on the streaming networks, I'm thinking I'm a total nerd for YA, like young adult fiction, and there's an adaptation, and the main character is half Asian or and is identifiable as Asian. Or when you think about the next season of Bridgerton, not to bring this into a historical romance, like turn this into a chat about that, they cast it like a South Asian actress. And so it's small steps like that, but I'm waiting for the rest of the industry to catch up. And I truly hope they do, because when that happens, there will be applause and acceptance from our entire community.
Absolutely.
I'd love to jump in. It's really interesting. Eva, you're saying these really fundamental things that like fire me up, because I remember flipping through magazine pages when I was really young, trying to find my shape eye, like trying to find how do I put on eyeshadow, and I realized I couldn't find any tutorials, and that subconscious message of like I'm an other was very deep, and my motivation to do all what I do as a musician and is motivated by that moment where I decided, okay, maybe I can be part of the change for more representation. And within the music industry, you know, because artists in the music side of things are expressing vocally, literally vocally, their opinions and their emotions, I've had to face a lot of interesting moments where people don't think that Asian Americans can make it as musicians, because they say, oh, I just don't see that. And, oh, you don't sound Asian. And then when I look at certain movies that make, like you said, Eva, the Asian American as the butt of the joke, as the quiet one in the show, of course, people are going to feel like, oh, I can't see an Asian vocalizing anything. And so even like being signed with Atlantic, I thought they were making great strides, and that was a big motivation to sign with them for a bit, was to help kind of expand our emotional public vocabulary. And we still have a lot of work to be done as we are straddling both like folk and soul music, which is generally considered to be of certain like heritages and communities, which I honor. Just like finding where do we blaze our sound and our history and our perspective within the sonic platform. That's been something that motivates me every day.
Yeah, and I want to add to that this absolutely bleeds into policy. So I can't tell you the amount of times that I've been in progressive spaces that say diversity is really important. I look around the room and I'm the only Asian American. And you can see this from polling too. Even if the API community was the margin of victory in Georgia, clearly showing that our voices matter, polling does not often include APIs. You know, political parties just don't care about reaching out to us. You know, I've heard from so many members of Congress that when they started their campaigns, you know, some Politico advisors would be like, hey, I don't know if, you know, your constituents will actually go for an Asian American, because it's so rare to see API political leaders or even activists. So, you know, I'm quite done justifying why it is that we can exist. People need to do it because it's the right thing to do. And one of the most glaring places within the federal agencies is that some federal agencies don't even include APIs in their definition of racial minorities. That's wild to me. So, you know, it really does stem from invisibility. And when you erase a whole group of people, that's when ignorance happens. And it's so important in these structural, systemic places that define, well, which stories get told, which essentially is which people are going to get empathized, right, with, that our stories are told, whether it be in music or in Hollywood or in fashion or in the news or a vote.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point, Eva, about Hollywood, you know, as entertaining as a movie or a book, and then a movie like Crazy Rich Asians is, or now there's Bling Empire, I mean, whether you watch it or not, you know, within the Asian community, the wealth gap, there's such a disparity, right? So there's no middle class. I mean, obviously that's a very general statement, but you know, from country to country, the middle class is really sort of lacking. So there's the extreme wealth and then extreme poverty. So even just having more stories that tell the range of what people experience will help to get that the model minority myth, the misconception that you know, Asians as a whole are fine because of they have their doctors or the lawyers or whatever. It's really only what Hollywood, to start with, but of course in so many other places, allows to make visible. So yes, Amanda, to your point, visibility, whether it's the vote, polling, Hollywood, music, MILCK, you are actively showing and telling and making it heard, literally, what an Asian singer-songwriter looks like and sounds like. And you know, I have no connection personally, I mean professionally, to the music world, but I can completely understand what you're saying. It's almost like I'm in the room hearing that record executive say, but what does an Asian pop, you know, singer look like? Or you don't sound Asian. It's like I can hear it, I can feel it, because they could never see it. So you're doing it, and I get chills about it. So thank you. So representation, you're actively representing Asian Americans in your respective fields and in the world. You're also very, very strong voices and activists in your own right. You are daily making change for your communities, for equality, for women's rights, for the rights of people to live lives free of violence. So I'd love to talk about that. Amanda, you took a profoundly traumatic experience and turned it into a movement for justice. Tell us about your work to use the law to protect and empower rape survivors.
You know, it boils down to, I needed civil rights and no one was going to write them for me. So I decided to write them and pass them. You know, I remember walking out of the hospital after my rape kit procedure was done, which was 6 hours long. Most people don't know that it can take that long. It's 3 to 7 hours. And it's both life-saving medical attention and also a forensic examination. And I was handed a taxi voucher to go right back to the place where I was raped. I thought to myself, okay, well, where do I go from here? And I remember walking to my local area rape crisis center, and there weren't enough seats for us in the waiting room. And I thought to myself, wow, I really cared about these issues before, but I had no idea how prevalent it was. And I also had no idea what kind of Kafkaesque labyrinth I would be made to walk through in this broken criminal justice system. So I realized I had a choice. I could accept the injustice. At that time, I found out that rape kits, untested, could be destroyed at 6 months, even if the statute of limitations is 15 years. In New York, it was 30 days before my law passed, where it would be destroyed. And I decided, okay, either accept that injustice or rewrite the law. And one of these things is a lot better than the other. So I spoke out about it. And I asked people to walk with me in the sense of passing a sexual assault survivor bill of rights. That law, the bill passed unanimously in Congress in 7 months, and President Obama signed it in 2016, and it grants civil rights to over 24 million rape survivors in the United States. And since then, we've passed 33 laws, state by state, and around the world as well.
So,
Yeah.
And that's impact. That's the next generation. Like, not just like an old person, a mature person, but this is something that I think that, especially Asian women in previous generations were told to be quiet, were told to be like, you know, more subservient or expected to be shy and recessive. And the work that Amanda's doing and the activism and the thousands and thousands of people who follow her on Instagram, and then she's inspiring in turn the next generation who will be vocal, who will like make change the way she has. So, I mean, truly, this is what gives me hope. Like, it's people, not to be like, this is the Amanda show, but this is like, it's about people like Amanda, like, and that is the future.
Well, I want to point out some things about sexual violence and the intersection between that and my Asian American identity, because all of these things are interconnected. So especially the Asian female body has been consistently fetishized in what's called yellow fever, right? Where we're seen as objects and therefore increases the chances of violence against us. So, you know, there is absolutely this intersectional thread in all the work that we do. And one of the key things that came out of when President Obama signed that first law into existence, signed my civil rights into existence, was people saying, hey, you don't look like a lawmaker, and yet you were able to do this. So if you can do it, maybe I can do it too, right? Which is why Rise has now transformed into helping people of all different campaigns. Sexual violence is one of them. AAPI, anti-hate crimes is another part of them. But I really want people to understand that they already have the ability to change laws. In fact, I think the country, a lot of people don't realize that it is our constitutional right to petition the government, that it is of the people, by the people, for the people. And it is so possible to create. In fact, it's not possible. That's what this country was meant for. This is democracy for you. And then one other thing I want to add onto this is that I think that to the earlier conversation about APIs, especially women contributing and being represented in different fields, we are already making massive waves in each of these industries. I think that it is time for the rest of the world to catch up and recognize MILCK, right? Most people don't know that the pink pussy hats was by an Asian American woman. I think her name's Krista Suh. Is that right, Connie?
Yes.
So the Women's March, one of the most iconic moments in recent history of grassroots mobilization, the look was defined by an Asian woman, and the anthem was MILCK, right? And people may not know that. So we're here, we're contributing, and it's so important that other people uplift our voices.
Oh, I would like to add to that. This is so juicy. I'm really stoked to be a part of this, by the way. What's interesting is that I've had conversations with Krista, and I've had these thoughts internally about how the dots have not been quite connected about the sound and the look and the policy behind the women's movement have been architected by Asian American women. And what I realize is that I don't want to wait anymore for other people to realize, and the power of storytelling and creating the content and media, like especially during pandemic when there's been like nothing else, I can't distract myself with traveling. I'm just really motivated in creating content to tell our stories. And this goes back to Grace Lee Boggs and also like, there's just so much that we have the power to do. And I want to acknowledge that in the process of learning to speak out and develop our justice voices, there are going to be moments where we feel fear. There's going to be moments where we're not sure if it's the right thing to say. And I don't want to stereotype all Asian Americans experiencing this, but I was raised by my father to say, he told me I must achieve 3 times as well as other people and just be so on top of it in order to even gain a seat at the table, which causes this sense of perfectionism. And that perfectionism is such a weakness that I am trying to battle on a daily basis. Do I share about the fact that my parents and I teared up during an outdoor picnic thinking about my grandma getting hurt? Do I share about the moments where I don't know what to say? Like all of those things. So I'm trying to practice this vulnerability, and I want to create more community with with other Asian Americans to figure out how do we develop our justice voice in a way that makes us feel more free and more authentic. Like what Amanda was saying from the very beginning of this talk about truth, like speaking our truth. That's my hope. And so I hope that through my music and exposing all these different emotions, anger, fear, like happiness, like we can allow ourselves to stretch and maybe say the things we're afraid to say.
I'm so happy you bring that up. This idea of perfectionism, and wanting to be vocal and trying to figure out and thinking and rethinking and about how to express it. I think about Instagram, which is where I've been the most vocal and where a lot of us have been. And I was struggling to sort of write that first post. I mean, I'd written stories about it, but it's easy to write stories because it's not me, right? I'm telling other people's stories through, I think Prabal was in it, Prabal Gurung, Philip Lim. It was about Asian voices in fashion. And it was the day that Amanda's post went up on Instagram where you addressed how a lot of these acts of violence, recent acts of violence, especially, have been eluding mainstream media. And, I went through your voice in a way. I mean, and I felt I wanted to channel you, because it was like, oh, she just turned on the camera and started speaking like so clearly. I mean, obviously you're great at it in general, but specifically about this topic. And I posted that, but ever since that post, I've tried to just like channel it, and to your point, Milk, drop the perfectionist aspect that maybe has been ingrained in a lot of us through our upbringing, through our culture, and really, I just really, really connect to what you just said, Milk, about finding our justice voice and not second guessing, because there's so much to say. And, like you said, Amanda, we are here, we've been here. It's sort of everybody else's, it's, what's on other people to catch up and pay attention. So thank you for saying that.
Well, also, like, taking that first step often is like the scariest, I think, for a lot of people on social media and on Instagram. And that's why it's so important to have voices like Amanda's, like Milk, like the Instagram account, Hate is a Virus. There's an account that's amazing called Asians for Mental Health. That's all about, that's run by a therapist. And she basically talks about Asian stigma. She talks about perfectionism. She talks about the mental health struggles that with perfectionism and taking on the burdens, as we were discussing, of our, forefathers and foremothers, such a formal word, but you know what I mean. There's a great account called 1721 Women that tells stories of Asian women. And sometimes it is easier to find that first step, and other people can help you find your voice. I think that's something that I tell younger people and all the time. It's like, doing your research and doing your homework and understanding your history and heritage. First of all, that's something that I need to do better at. I don't have my family, I think, like many, like we were talking about survival earlier, and emotional and vulnerability, it's like not something my family is great at, and it's something that I still work on every day. But finding like-minded people on social media, I think you can find your tribe, you can find your people that understand you and develop a connection. It's amazing to see like-minded people come together, and what people can achieve when that happens.
I wanted to share an experience of writing a song called Somebody's Beloved after listening to Tamika Palmer talk about her daughter, Breonna Taylor. And this song just flooded out of me. And my first reaction when it was done was fear. I was like, I don't want to literally center my voice to sing about the Black Lives Matter movement, because I don't know if I'm supposed to center my voice. And I went through this internal debate. And so I after a while, I distilled it down to two choices. I had one, just don't work on the song, don't release it. And then you're kind of safe, because no one can criticize you for what you have done. Or second choice was just go and possibly make mistakes, possibly have blind spots as an East Asian with privilege, and learn. And the whole process was so intense for me. However, after a few months of doing it and figuring out how I want to create the Somebody's Beloved Fund and how to do certain parts of activism, I feel a little more comfortable, because it's like bravery is this muscle. I'm like flexing and then speaking out as an Asian woman about things like race that can charge people's emotions. And I have that that trained people pleasing type of mentality that I'm constantly rewiring in my brain. To face it every day has helped me. And I desire that for our community and other communities of color, because I think the more we know ourselves, the better we can serve our movement and other communities' movements, like the Black Lives Matter movement and Indigenous people.
No, you're right. I think Asian communities, through art, through storytelling, sharing stories, it'll help us come together, because we need to unify stronger before we can sort of expect other people to understand fully our collective but separate cultural identities. So I think you kind of answered it. I was just going to ask you, Milk. You've been so open about your own experience of abuse and how long it took you to heal. What helped you on that journey?
Mm. Yeah, I think the experience of healing my own abuse has been very dependent on little moments of trying, just micro moments of practicing bravery, from a good friend of mine mistaking that my favorite restaurant is restaurant A, to being like, and having that little moment of, actually, I don't really like that restaurant. I actually like this one. It's so small, but practicing speaking our truths in these little moments. And then then we expand to, I have depression and I have anxiety, which then goes to, I've had a lot of privilege and I think I've been a bystander with anti-blackness in my community. And saying those things have helped me feel more in touch with myself. And the usually what happens is that my community embraces me and my loved ones, and so I develop more trust within myself and others.
And to continue the activism conversation, Eva, you've used your platform, including on social media, to showcase diversity. For example, when you were at Teen Vogue, you made sure that you included girls from lots of different backgrounds. How much of that sensibility is shaped by your experience as a first generation Chinese American?
I would say most of it is shaped by my experience. Most of my experience with trying to showcase diversity and being more inclusive was impacted by my upbringing. I think everyone on this call has been in had the experience of being the only Asian in a room, right? Or being the only woman in the room. For me, still happens at times. And I think when I was a magazine editor, every time I thought about putting an editorial together, it's like, do we have the right casting? Could we cast someone who, when thinking about Black women, can we cast a Black woman with darker skin? It's of course, that's a big conversation in the Black community as well. The being favoring light-skinned and putting that on a pedestal. And we see that in the Asian community as well, right? Like in beauty, where you see products that are called whitening products because it's assumed that Asian culture. I have a face full of freckles. I grew up with various people grabbing my face and saying like, "Ah, yeah, like your skin is like, look at all these freckles." I am still scarred from the experience of I think I was probably 8 years old, and I remember my mom taking me to a strip mall because I had like a freckle, and she was like, "Oh, it's in an unlucky place," and then literally getting we're going to take this conversation. We can take this offline, but getting that freckle removed and the woman kind of looking at my face and being like, you spend too much time in the sun, and so showcasing different kinds of beauty is incredibly important. It is Asian beauty, it is South Asian beauty, it is Black beauty, it is Latin beauty. There's so many different standards of beauty. And again, that's why I do feel I know that people say that social media is a double-edged sword, but I do also feel like if Instagram had existed when I was younger and I could follow, different women, I could get a makeup tutorial. I know, Milk, you were talking about this. I have a really good friend of mine from college at 40 years old, learned how to do eyeliner for her monolid on Instagram because she didn't ever, when she was younger, have a magazine teach her how to do makeup for a monolid, eye shape. And so she needed social media to teach her how to do that. And now, if you're a 15-year-old trying to put on eyeshadow for the first time, you can learn about it through an IGTV. It's inspiring in its own way.
Yeah, sure. That representation that you can actually find on Instagram, on social media, is there for you. And to your point about skin lightening, I had my first bout with a bottle of skin lightener at 8 years old as well. So it It was brought to me because I had a little freckle at the end of my nose. So it was just unacceptable. So
unacceptable is probably like in an unlucky, superstitious place. Like I know that my freckle was like right under my eye. So the superstition was that I would like have a life of tears or something. And so they had to like remove it. And I remember it like so vividly. And like even now, like my freckles, I remember being in Korea and South Korea and being told that I was like the darkest skin complexion and people being like, you need these 456 products. And I'm like, I'm good, thanks. Like, I have time to do a 56-step beauty routine. But I do think it's still very pervasive. It's different in the US, certainly, where we all live. But those standards of beauty are still very much happening globally.
Especially being told at such a young age, and hopefully for our children or the next generation, that's not going to be the case between, how we're talking or not talking to them. And then also through social media, through media changing, ideally. I remember people telling me how lucky I was that I had a fold. Oh, your eyes are big. Oh, you should be so happy. So, conversely, sort of like praising something rather than telling me like, oh, you have dark spots. It's like, oh, you have a lid. So it's like, and then starting to work in fashion and beauty, I'm also complicit in perpetuating these ideas, right? Of centering beauty on Eurocentric standards, on white centered beauty. So yes, there's a lot of unlearning there as well. So thank you for that. COVID has led to a global increase in violence against women. What can we do to change that?
You're absolutely right that COVID has led to this violence against women, especially in domestic violence and sexual violence. We've seen spikes like this really following the trail of any type of crisis. So natural disasters, of war, and of course, in this case, a pandemic. And the elements of this specific crisis, the movement restrictions that are necessary, exacerbate the experiences of people who are contained, confined, and can't find outlets. So one thing that RISE has done is, as a rapid response program, we partnered with brick and mortar stores, so pharmacies, grocery stores, restaurants, and have trained staff in these places to be trauma informed. And when a survivor comes in and says a code word, it's Rise Up 19, if there's a flyer, they say it to a staffer, then that staffer is trained to take them to a safe place within that facility and hand them the facility's phone because of cyber stalking, and dial the number of the hotline instead of the police, and have them be able to walk through with a professional in a safe place that is not trackable, traceable, to help them make a decision about where they want to go from there. So the first part of Survivor Safe Haven, is what we're calling this program, is about direct access to resources. The second, which is just as important, is the concept of allyship. So there's, I think his name's Adam Grant. He's a Stanford psychology professor. Sheryl Sandberg talks about him a lot. And he has this concept called the button, where there's an experiment. And if you were able to, they asked participants to put their hand in an ice bucket of water, so something painful. And if you had a button where you could call for help, those people actually lasted a lot longer than the people who didn't have that option, even though none of the people actually pressed the button, they just lasted longer. So the idea here is that if you build a community of allyship, right, if every single downtown place was a survivor safe haven, and you knew that, oh, these people are looking out for me, right, I have a choice when I need it to be able to go somewhere, that can help alleviate so much. And so, the program, unfortunately, has to persist beyond COVID, because the data shows that in these crises, this uptick of violence against women lasts for at least 2 years. And currently, we're so grateful to be partnering with folks like, Governor Cuomo partnered with us for all pharmacies within New York State, and Jose Andres is another person. All DC restaurants of his are survivor safe havens, and we're just continuing to raise awareness about this.
That's incredible. Yeah. Thank you for that. And speaking of allies, we're hearing that word a lot right now, allies and allyship. So back to what we were talking about before about, the rise in anti-Asian hate crime and violence. I'd like to hear from each of you how people watching this right now can help to be a good ally.
I was going to say, I read this one quote from my friend Kylan Young. He is an incredible Black voice, and he posted something that resonated with me. He said, the word accomplice is a word that feels really good to me, is what he said. It feels like it goes a little bit deeper, like you're with us in this work and in this fight. And so I like to open that possibility for people to look at allyship and then look at being an accomplice with us in helping to share our stories, helping to humanize us. So that's the first thing. And I would say, I found there's this comedian named Atsuko, and she's really creative with her posts. And recently she's been doing these wonderful posts of humanizing the Asian elders. And she's been doing these slightly comical videos with her grandmother, bring me a lot of joy. And I think having us being able to humanize our family members, our community, and then having other people that are not in the Asian community to share and to just reach out to us once in a while. I think that love is felt, especially when we're trying to do activism and trying to navigate this really emotionally painful topic of racist violence. Having a friend just reaching out to say, I see you, is a tremendous gift, personally.
Yeah, I think that it's so important that people make a choice now, if they're able to, if they're in a safe place to decide whether or not they want to be on the right side of history. And that means many things. The first, of course, is at the root of this is invisibility. So the solution is visibility. It's getting to know the Asian American Pacific Islander experience. It's educating oneself about our history. It's covering our stories, not only our grief, but also our excellence. And it's teaching our history in schools. It's counting us in the federal government. Literally stop, erasing us. And for folks every day, yes, tweets, Instagram posts, all of these things are so, so important. I think it has highlighted over the past several days that our voice really does matter. No one is invisible when we demand to be seen, and we are demanding to be seen right now as a community, right? And so just know that the most powerful tool you have is your voice. You can speak it up if you want to, and you can also choose to do so within your own family. There's so many different tools to give back. So, beyond speaking up with your community, your neighborhood, your schools, your parents, and, learning more and educating yourself, think about folks that are doing this work on the ground too. For instance, RISE is made up of community organizers from all around America. And if you want to support the work, you can go to risenow.us/donate, or you can sign up to volunteer. These are both things that you can do to help, not only advance the cause, but also teach yourself about how to take your place and your power within our democracy.
Yeah, I think MILCK and Amanda basically summed it all up, but I would say the first step and the most important step is that first step, and it can be a small one. It could literally be opening up a web page on your phone or on your laptop and looking up an organization like RISE, looking up an organization like Apex for Youth, which serves low-income Asians in New York. If people have any preconceived notions about the model minority myth, like Apex for Youth will dispel that. Most Asians in New York live way below the poverty line. It could be going to an organization like Safe Walks. Safe Walks, spelled with an X actually, on Instagram, and you can volunteer to be to help walk people to safety in Chinatown, accompanying an elder person. it could also be going to your local Chinatown if you have one and supporting the small businesses there. They are suffering. They've been suffering for over a year. When COVID-19 came to the US, the first businesses that started shutting down were Chinatown businesses because people were scared to go there. And so support can show up in a lot of different ways. It can be if an activist or if a friend posts a brave story of her grandmother or grandfather, literally liking that post and sending them a message and saying like, that was brave. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I learned something. So, I mean, I do think small steps kind of lead to bigger ones and bigger ones and bigger ones. There's this amazing snowball effect of activism, and you have to start somewhere. So that first step, like just try taking it. You will see how you feel afterwards.
So important. Yeah, I took notes because I think these so many powerful words that you just said humanize us. Humanize our families, our elders, our community, share stories, stop erasing us, be an accomplice, not just an ally. I think that's a really, really strong way to be thinking about this. And my last question for each of you, I could talk to you all day, but and I'll just continue Insta-stalking you, DMing you, continuing this conversation. But my last question for each of you is, what gives you hope? And I will start by saying that each of you gives me hope. To Eva's point, this next generation, the younger generation, people coming up, we see activism, we see awareness already, whether they're 8, 12, 16, is really hopeful. So many of them are inspired by each of you. So you all give me hope. And what gives each of you hope?
I feel like what gives me hope right now is, as you said, the next generation. It could be someone in their 20s. I have 2 young children, soon to be 3 young kids. And, I look at my daughter and I want to make the world a better place for her. And so that generation gives me hope because I think that there's a possibility of them growing up with different standards of beauty, with different expectations. My daughter wants to be a firefighter and a mom when she grows up, like those 2 things together in one. And I feel like empowering her and seeing how others empower her is what gives me hope, and seeing role models for her to grow up into, whether it is like a MILCK or an Amanda or a you Melissa, or, Kamala Harris, like, there's so many kind of icons now, feminist, strong, diverse icons that she's surrounded by that I didn't have. And I think that in of itself is true hope.
I am really hopeful. I was hiking and listening to the audiobook Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong, and I had this really visceral feeling of hope because I felt like, oh, this is information and a voice that I have been maybe silently searching for in my mind, not even realizing I was looking for a wise and fierce voice like Kathy Park Hong's, and now she's published and she's available for us to share, and we can start. I get goosebumps thinking about this. I talk about this a lot lately, is the new Asian American. What is the new Asian American? We have this like possibility of redefining and like just telling our story in a certain way and prioritizing the values that we're all going to just start creating and agreeing upon, and we're coming together. Like I haven't seen this many Asian American friends of mine really putting in the effort to face their own like blockages of speaking up and doing it, and also them learning about people who have already been speaking up for a very long time, because we're not a quiet bunch. It's just we haven't been documented in the histories that we're reading. So just that gives me hope. Kathy Park Hong gives me hope. You all give me hope. And this conversation about the new Asian American, it's happening right now. And I'm really excited about that.
And just to add to the chorus of what has been said, each and every person on here does give me hope. It's a long tradition of people taking their painful living truths and channeling that into justice. I think we are in this new moment, this zeitgeist where people are joining that tradition by speaking up. Peace is not the absence of visible conflict. In order for there to be true peace, people need to speak up about the Asian American experience, and hold a light to that darkest corner where we have been erased, we have been omitted, and say, no longer. I see you, I hear you, and we're just getting started. That gives me hope.
I'm somewhere between chills and tears. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And I also hope that you will be an ally and a voice for the Asian American community, sharing our stories, humanizing our community, and standing up, of course, in the face of any form of violence that you witness or you hear about. If you enjoyed this conversation, I hope you'll tune in to the other incredible conversations on thelittlemarket.com.